Let's take a walk down memory lane to Christmas from when you were young. I remember when my parents bought a Nintendo Wii the year it came out. They went and waited in line on Black Friday, and then they surprised me for Christmas. I made lots of memories on it, and I even still own the same one and the same games that, I got around that time to this day. Now imagine buying a game you can't play after all these years, your purchase is just disappearing. That horrible, cruel reality is happening more often, especially nowadays as the days go on, more and more news about it comes out. So today, let's talk about why video game preservation is essential. It's all about consumer rights, cultural history, and guarding against a disappearing entertainment medium. So I'm going to break down each section into different kind of categories, and I'm going to elaborate on them. The first one I want to talk about is why preservation and ownership is really important and why it matters. So from the very start when video games came out, physical media meant ownership. It meant you could go and play a SNES, a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo 64, a Wii, Xbox, PlayStation game decades later, as long as, you took care of them and prevented disk rot or pin rot or corrosion and such on the discs and cartridges. Plus, back then, the base price was roughly around $40 to $60 in, equivalent exchange of currency and, inflation, blah, 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 whatever you want to take into account. But, it was on the cheaper end. And there's a lot of times you can buy secondhand games cheap as well. And you could have hours of fun. That meant that base price of $40 to $60 meant that you could have hours upon hours of fun and not worry about it just magically disappearing one day unless, it breaks and, but that's a whole different thing. With today's digital games, you see it increasingly require constant server connections, even for single player titles. So basically you have to go online to install the game or to even play it, especially with PS5 and Xbox Series X and the newer consoles coming out. They require you to have internet connection. And that's from the moment you get a brand new video game. You're just gonna have to sit there and wait for it to install, for it to grab files offline, and for it to put onto your system. And then what are you gonna do once the server goes offline, or if you are out of internet, like your internet just goes off? You're not gonna be able to play the game. And for you, the consumer, that means you lose access entirely to everything, even if you bought it, which, you went to GameStop and paid $70, $80 for the new medium for pricing on video games. Game shutdowns cause a lot of havoc in the gaming community. It erases not just the ability to play and to enjoy and make memories, but the progress, achievements, mods you put into it, and communities as a whole. The creative expression is just gone. It's lost. To which there will be no way to actually preserve the game at hand to allow future generations to look at it, to have hands-on experiences with it, as well as possibly inspire future generation of game designers. Now you're asking why, I'm saying that. Why is it impossible? Why can't this happen? Well, let's go into recent events that have been going on, especially here in 2025 and 2024. A lot of things have been coming out and taking place. So let's take a look at recent events that really do impact everything I've talked about, that basically undermine consumer rights. In March of 2024, Ubisoft shut down the servers for The Crew, which came out in 2014, delisted it from storefronts, and revoked licenses, even for their users with physical copies. Keep in mind, this was on PlayStation 4, which means anything from the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era and onwards can be revoked without any cause and for any reason. So basically, players lost all access entirely and community servers were not allowed. This is not the only example of this happening. Recently, there was a game called Anthem that announced that everything's going to be shut down in January of 2026. There was a lot of pushback and a lot of anger towards it recently, but we will touch on this a little bit later in the video. Ubisoft later stated in a legal filing that players do not own the games. They only hold a license, even for physical discs. The CEO came out and stated that this is what they wanted for all games. They want the ability to take it away. Basically, they want you to pay $70 just to rent the title. This man actually came out and said it. And of course, there was a huge amount of backlash towards that because it's stupid. Especially like when I said before, when video games came out, it was all about you owned everything. You had the full game. You actually owned what you bought. There was no DLC to finish the game. You never got half-baked, not finished things. Everything was fully completed. And obviously everything's changed since, I would say about the early 2000s to mid 2010s. Like around that era, that's when there was a big shift, but we'll talk about that later. And like I said, needless to say, there was a bunch of backlash, like a huge, enormous consumer backlash towards Ubisoft, and their stocks tanked and they had consequences. You can also look and refer to the recent changes that Nintendo has recently done. Before, you would own the game as whole, but now with the Switch 2, they are fully switching over to digital with these digital keys, and the physical key, like chips you get, like the cartridges, aren't really things. They're just like PlayStation and Xbox. You just go and grab it from online and download it. Whereas before, you would actually just have the game and you could play it outright. Minus, day one patches and everything else, which is a whole nother topic. They are fully switching over, which is now allowing and following the pathway of Microsoft and Sony with the rental idea that CEOs really want to do. This is a major and final change in the game industry that is another nail in the coffin for consumer rights and video game preservation. Nintendo was holding out, especially when it comes to the prices. Now it's going to be on average like $80 for the Switch 2 and like the newer cartridges, which is just proving that everyone can bump up their game prices, and it just hurts the consumer while, all the world economies are suffering at this point due to a bunch of different things. You can also look towards California. Legislators passed AB 2426, which was effective January 1st of 2025, requiring digital storefronts to disclose purchases or licenses, not permanent ownership. Steam also has added this disclaimer, and same to GOG, but Steam has added disclaimers, but GOG proudly emphasizes that it's, you own the game. There's no digital recourse or anything like that. You can't just pull it. Once you buy it from GOG, you own the game, and there's nothing, no one can say about that. But because of all this, I want to take a closer look at the CEOs and like publishers and what they really think about this. And like I've stated before, the CEOs themselves really want us to just rent the game and give them a bunch of money, and they can just pull the title whenever they want. So since I talked about Ubisoft, let's start with them. Ubisoft insists they are justified. Closures result from server infractures and licensing constraints, which is kind of wild to say since they're constantly growing and spending more and more money on games that kind of still look like they were made for the PlayStation 2 in 2000, like in today's date, like in 2025. But then there's indie companies out there making Exploration 33, like they're small indie companies with like 1/100th of the budget, but they're out here making masterpieces, genuine masterpieces, on not as much budget as these huge big industry like game changers. Video Games Europe, this is another thing we want to talk about. Video Games Europe basically represents all the top publishers, in Europe itself, which are, Microsoft, EA, Nintendo argues that requiring offline modes or private servers would be prohibitively expensive, risk legal liabilities, and limit developer creativities and business models. But these are also the same companies that are constantly and aggressively going towards AI and stealing artwork from all the employees that they have had in the past, and then they keep firing and rehiring to keep that process going, but it was all due to cost. The big reason they don't want single player modes, in my opinion, is the fact that they can't milk the consumer for online subscriptions and the millions of microtransactions that come from online games, such as Call of Duty Warzone, Fortnite, Battlefield, etc. All the skins, all the pay to win stuff. They can't do that if they make a single player game. Meanwhile, industry leaders continue designing games that rely on server connections for the majority of gameplay, effectively undermining permanent access, so that way they can force this to be the main trend in the industry. Also, they can make more money and not give you the full rights to the game they are making or made. Nintendo was mostly the last major holdout in my eyes, but with the Switch 2, and like I've discussed before, they have given into this as well as increasing the median price when it comes to the game cost for the consumer. Now, because Nintendo was the last holdout, let's start looking back comparatively now from like modern games to the 2000s era. So let's compare of when they started switching over to when it started going downhill. In the 2000s, games often shipped on disc or cartridges and played fully offline. When I talk about cartridges, I'm talking about like Game Boy Advance and stuff of that nature. Even if servers were shut down, the core gameplay remained accessible. This was because single player mode and local co-op and multiplayer was the go-to for video games. It allowed people to play games with their friends, giving advertisement to the game, causing the friend to go out and buy it and so they can play with them. Online video game play did not really take off until like the mid 2000s, but it wasn't really a focus or push until the mid to early 2010s. One of the big contrasts with games of today, compared to the older games of the early 2000s and before, are games like The Crew I mentioned before, Battlefield, Fortnite, Overwatch, Warzone, Destiny, Anthem, which, I mentioned Anthem before as well. Once the servers go offline, the experiences vanish. Like all the experiences, all the communities, everything, it just disappears. So all that time, money, blood, sweat, tears invested were all for nothing. You can never go back online to relive those moments or even to admire all the hard work you were putting into that character profile, the guild, whatever you were doing depending on the game. In the past, preservation was very possible via emulation or secondhand markets. In modern titles, there is no archival path without explicit support from the publisher for legal means. There are foundations out there such as the Video Game History Foundation, which I've done multiple things for, videos on charity events, etc., that are fighting for the preservation and to save the games as well as the history around them, such as magazines, articles, merchandise, promo gear from like E3, PAX East, that kind of stuff. Game companies are actively fighting against them, to which they have lawyers stating that because of preservation, they're hurting profits and they go against the maker's rights. How does that make sense when it comes to a 20-year-old game at this point? I don't understand it. I've made a whole separate video, which I can link down below on my old channel. I really recommend you checking it out because it's insane. So speaking of that, there is a giant movement going on in Europe. It's the European movement for consumer rights, which you can kind of call it, or what we all like to call it, the Stop Killing Games Initiative. But let's talk about the history of that real quick, and then I'll dive more into it, because there's a lot of things that happen as of late that deal with this initiative, which is a shining beacon of hope that everyone should look upon and support if possible. So, in April of 2024, there was a guy by the name of Ross Scott. He launched the Stop Killing Games Initiative. It's both a global consumer movement and a European citizens initiative demanding legal protections to ensure access to purchase games even after support ends. To which a Nepo baby by the name of Pirate Software has actively fought against it. Hey, speaking of which, did you know that he worked for Blizzard at some point and he's like one of the best people Blizzard ever had?
I was watching a video that was critiquing you for mentioning you work at Blizzard so much. I literally never talk about it. When I worked at Blizzard, I did that for Blizzard. Blizzard, 7 years, yeah. Blizzard. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment.
Stating that it was too costly and it would hurt companies and they would have to fire people and it would just undermine the whole gaming industry as a whole. Hey, by the way, did you know his father also worked for Blizzard too? Just, fun fact that, we should probably keep talking about.
Your red team specialist for Blizzard Entertainment and Blizzard is having worked at Blizzard. I grew up at Blizzard.
So he actively made up these lies to try and hurt the movement of this initiative. For what reason, we don't know. People speculate he's a plant or, a bunch of other crazy things, but he's just a liar. That's all Pirate Software is. It's a big whole thing that's coming out right now. If you really want to look into it, go look into it. It's very obvious once, people start putting everything, together. But there is good news on that front. As of last month, July of 2025, the EU petition has surpassed 1.25 million signatures, and the UK petition has hit its 100,000 threshold, and I believe it's going beyond that, which is triggering a formal review and parliamentary debate, respectively. This came after Ross made a video clarifying what the Nepo baby who worked at Blizzard was lying about.
Game industry for Blizzard Entertainment. Blizzard. Yeah, no, I worked at Blizzard back when I used to work at Blizzard, when I was at Blizzard. For those who don't understand, I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment. I know how to do that because I worked at Blizzard. Example of this, when I was at Blizzard, how do you know so many things? I worked at Blizzard for 7 years. I don't think I'm better than other people. I do think that it's funny because you key on that. There's a lot of people that brought that up. And it's like, I never said that I was. I think sometimes the things that I talk about in regards to those types of things is misconstrued as arrogance or boasting. When in reality, I'm just trying to give context.
So that is the problem right there. So I want you to listen to this phrase.
And what the whole idea behind this movement is for, and what it actually means. It's to protect consumers and the products they bought, not renting the IPs out or the discs out. EU Vice President Nicole Stalov, I don't know how to pronounce that, there's the name right there, endorsed the campaign with a clear statement. Once a game is sold, it belongs to the customer, not the company. which is amazing to have people in the government wanting to back this, wanting to actually protect consumers' rights like this. It can set a precedence for organizations in the United States and around the world and help achieve preservation efforts and prove that this is for history and education for the future generations, as well as protect consumer rights now and for the future at hand. And what the Nepo baby was talking about, they were saying that the initiative demanded perpetual servers to being hosted and a bunch of other stuff that would open up the world to being hacked and people getting doxxed and extorted. The initiative doesn't demand any of that, like the Nepo baby stated, who worked at Blizzard, and his father was one of the people who started working at Blizzard, in case you didn't know.
This gets misconstrued as arrogance, but in reality, it's this. Yeah. That is the most arrogant statement on the planet, bro.
I actually am the first second-generation Blizzard employee. I was the first second-generation Blizzard employee ever. The first second-generation Blizzard employee. First second-generation Blizzard employee. So I'm second-generation Blizzard. I'm the first second-generation Blizzard employee.
Instead, it proposes offline modes, community server tools, and end-of-life planning from publishers to preserve the game's experience. A well-balanced approach. At this point, people start asking, why does this matter? Why do consumer rights really matter? What are the stakes here? Well, let me basically list it out for you as easy and as simple as I can. When games disappear, they aren't just purchases lost. They take creative history with them. Communities, mods, user-generated stories, art that has taken shape and inspired countless people. These games have memories and formed friendships for people. Video games have impacted culture in countless ways, from educating people on how to read and write, to learning life lessons that can change a person's future. Video games have impacted in so many different ways. We cannot lose the stories to time and the impact they have had. Empirical studies like those from the Video Game History Foundation show that nearly 87% of the pre-2010 games are no longer consumerly available. Many are effectively just gone forever. We have lost so much already, but big corporations, they just don't care. They just want to milk consumers for everything we have. Meanwhile, there are people who want things to be preserved, such as myself and others who make content, and others who actively sort out legal proceedings and seek out how they can do it, such as the Video Game History Foundation. And they want to have things preserved and shared with the future generations in a chance that they can be inspired just as we have in the current time. Preservation is a cultural preservation. Without it, gaming as an artistic medium risks being fragmented and forgotten, to which everything would be all for naught. So, what can you do? There are a couple different things that you can do. For one, if you're in the EU or UK, sign those petitions. Raise global awareness. Spread it around. Tell your friends. Tell your gamer friends. Repost on Twitter. Do any of that stuff. Support DRM-free, preservation-friendly platforms like GOG, back-end developers who commit to long-term access, so you don't have to worry about losing it as soon as the servers are shut down. With GOG, they are helping keep things alive. They are helping keep the single-player and multiplayer things alive as best as they can, so support GOG. Go out and collect. If you are a collector and you collect video games, find a way to preserve them. Take care of the discs. Do something to help show off the different stories. Recommend things. Just do stuff to help preserve and save items. Right now, it's a turbulent time when it comes to preservation, and it's kind of a lost world out there. It's kind of foggy, but there are beacons of hope out there that are making a change, and slowly but surely, change is coming. I just want to leave you with these final thoughts here, and I really think they might mean something to you. Digital rights and permanent access shouldn't be privileges. They should be expected when you pay for a product. We cannot build a future of gaming without protecting its history. Preserve games, protect rights, fight for your purchases, make your value go. So with that, I hope you guys understand what the importance of all this stuff is, from E3 merchandise to being able to go and play a game from the early on. I mean, before, when video game companies didn't want things to get out there or try to hide stuff, they did what they did with ET on the Atari. Recall them and try to bury them in the desert, to which even then, we still dug them up. So if you really care about the preservation, go check out all those organizations, go sign the petitions, do whatever you have to do to get the word out there. I hope this was educational. I hope it was informative, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye!
That ever existed in the company. I'm also a second-generation Blizzard employee. I was a second-generation Blizzard employee. I was the first second-generation Blizzard employee ever. I was the first second-generation Blizzard employee. And I love that shit. I love that company. Working for Blizzard sucked, and I work at Blizzard. Or I worked at Blizzard. There's me eating a sandwich. Yeah, that was actually at Blizzard. I think it was my first, I think it was 2009. It was me picking a safe. It was me cracking a safe in, at Blizzard. Your Blizzard stories are fake? Which Blizzard story do you think is fake? Would you like to talk to me or my dad that worked at Blizzard for 23 years that's currently in chat? Which one do you want?